After the bold strategy of burying Leanne alive, Dorothy takes a different approach in episode 5 by being good cop. She leaves the door unlocked and lets Leanne downstairs where Leanne finds Dorothy making pancakes, acting like nothing happened and everything's okay. Dorothy tells Leanne that her and Sean discussed it and they think it'd be best if they let Leanne out and about every day for a few hours. But as Leanne looks over at the door, it's padlocked. Leanne then notices that the table is set for more than 2 or 3 people and asks, is anyone coming? And boy, is somebody coming. It's Toby. Dorothy says, I thought you could use a friend. And Toby and Leanne have that awkward, hi, sorry about kidnapping you, interaction. So Toby and Leanne sit down for breakfast, but when Dorothy tries to give Leanne some pancakes, Leanne says, no thank you. She's being very, very standoffish and cold. Sean then comes upstairs because Sean was in the basement just staring at the hole that Dorothy buried Leanne in. So the first thing he does is pull Dorothy aside and say, you scared me last night. And Dorothy is aware that she went way too far, but she tells Sean the fact remains we still need to draw her out. Hell, I actually thought you'd be proud of me for trying to devise a new strategy. They walk back in the kitchen where Sean starts to clean up breakfast, but at the table, Toby asks Leanne in front of both Sean and Dorothy, hey, how's everything going? And Leanne just gives a quick, good. Toby starts to apologize for everything that happened the night that he kidnapped her, but Leanne says, Mrs. Turner has made it quite clear, the situation. Toby then starts rambling, saying, it just sounds like you fell in with a bad crew. Same thing happened to me in high school. It wasn't religious, it was more like they did coke. And Toby ends up admitting in front of his bosses that he did coke, which isn't the smartest move, so he decides to change the subject to Jericho, asking where he is because he hasn't seen him, and Dorothy cuts in and says he's with his grandparents today. Toby then turns to Leanne and asks, hey, when everything's better and good, do you want to go hang out, just the 2 of us? But Dorothy answers for her, saying, when all this horrible business is behind us, Leanne will be allowed to go where she pleases. So after this awkward play date, Dorothy escorts Leanne back upstairs where she tells her more fun could be had if she just cooperates. You can see that I'm doing what I'm supposed to. But Leanne is still very standoffish with Dorothy and doesn't really accept her half-assed apology, just telling her, you can lock me up now. And with no TV and no radio in the attic, that night, in front of that mannequin, Leanne starts writing down a recipe from memory. The next morning, there's a knock at the door, and Dorothy answers it, and it's a package. And when she opens it up, she's mortified. It is a teeny tiny baby that is maybe the size of a thumb, with a note attached that says, bring $200,000 to a food court mall. And maybe the scariest part is the fact that it came from Sean's account, so they feel like they've been hacked. But Sean is fairly certain he knows who it is. Figures it's Julian. And when Julian comes that day, he tells Julian, we got to talk about things like this. You've got her all riled up there. The issue is Julian didn't send the baby. And if Julian didn't send it and Sean didn't send it, then that means it must have been May and George. And they start freaking out a little bit. Because George had explicitly told him he didn't want money, but Julian says you didn't offer him enough. Now, they both know that there's no scenario where Dorothy doesn't head to the mall with a large bag of cash. They need to devise a plan. They're able to scrounge up most of the money, having to sell off some assets, including Sean's prize coffee maker. And the next day, which is supposed to be the day of the drop, when Leanne comes downstairs, she tells Sean that she wants to bake a cake and hands him the ingredients. But Sean doesn't have some of them, and he's pressed for time, so he gets Toby to do it. That night, Toby comes over with the groceries, as does Julian. And as everybody is getting the money together and the assets, when Dorothy heads up to see what's going on with Leanne, she notices that Leanne has dressed up that mannequin in one of her tops. And she's kind of upset about it, but Leanne doesn't give a rat's ass what Dorothy thinks at this point, just walking downstairs. So as both Sean and Dorothy head off to the mall, Julian is going to stay there tasked with watching them, while Leanne and Toby make this cake. But Julian's main focus is FaceTiming Dorothy, while also FaceTiming Roscoe, the private investigator, who's on the second floor of the food court, keeping an eye on Dorothy and Sean. So while Julian communicates with them over in the kitchen, Leanne starts making what's called a king cake. She tells Toby that she learned how to make it from her mother because her mother wanted her to have some talent for pageants. This after her mother also told her that she has no talent. She also tells a really sad story that her mom would always put on the brandy glaze if she didn't drink it already. And if Leanne performed well in the pageant, she would even allow Leanne to put the baby in the cake. Leanne was only allowed to do that 4 times, though. Her mother would tell her whoever found the baby was special, and somehow her mother always found the baby, and she would hold it up and make Leanne say, you're the special one. And this really stuck with Leanne, and she seems traumatized over it. Toby eventually asks, where's your mother now? And Leanne just mumbles, burning. But maybe the biggest observation is the fact that this tiny little baby that came in the mail with the ransom note was actually for the king cake. And that actually checks out because nobody's showing up at the mall for this ransom. It leads both Dorothy and Sean to think that maybe it's a setup, but when Julian goes to check in on Leanne, he finds only Leanne in the kitchen. He asks what happened with Toby, and Leanne says he had to go home. Julian, also worried that it might be a setup, tells Leanne, okay, it's time to go to bed, and he escorts her upstairs. And once he locks the door, that's when Toby pops out, because Toby didn't go home, he just hid in the attic, and Toby sees that Julian just locked her inside. Julian heads downstairs and is talking to Sean because the mall is closed and they're getting kicked out, and they're trying to figure out who sent this baby, who would have had access to Sean's account. And if it wasn't Sean, and it wasn't Dorothy, and it wasn't Julian, it must have been Leanne. So Julian heads upstairs to find Toby in the attic with Leanne, and he promptly kicks Toby out, and then turns attention to Leanne, saying, why would you do that to her? And Leanne just says, I want to see her get what she deserves. But downstairs, as the couple is getting kicked out, while still FaceTiming with Julian, having no idea that he's upstairs, all of a sudden somebody grabs the camera, and it's Uncle George, and he just says, Julian. And once Roscoe sees that, he gets the hell out of there, telling Julian, sorry, man, I can't do it. Now, Julian doesn't see any of this, so when the Turners get home that night, in walks Dorothy and in walks Sean. But to Julian's shock, in walks Uncle George, who screams at him, where is she? And she is just upstairs, housing King Cake. I mean, she's just smashing this stuff in her mouth. But the more she does it, the more she's not finding the baby. And she's getting more and more angry. And then all of a sudden, light bulbs that are next to her start bursting. Eventually, though, she does find the baby, and she holds it up to the mannequin that you can only assume she's dressed up like her mother. Thanks for checking this recap out. Consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video if you liked it. Hit thumbs down if you didn't. If you don't see the next episode in one of the end screens, not to worry, it'll be up shortly. Be nice in the comments section. If you heard a mistake, hey, mistakes happen. You don't have to point it out. You can just keep it moving. And check out my guys over at Scene Invaders. They're reacting live to each episode of Servant. It's not a recap. It's just their reaction to the episode. It's really good stuff. Check them out as well.